Well, hi there! By now, most of you know that I love pretty much all animals. That said, some have an extra special place in my heart. Generally, in a given clade, there are one or two groups that I think are just extra special. Well, high on that list for me are these. Sloths. Honestly, if you ever find somebody who dislikes sloths, you should just back away from that person slowly. There's something substantially wrong with that person. Sloths are delightful and wonderful. And interestingly enough, there are two families of sloths alive today. And the two families can be difficult to tell apart because they're so similar in appearance. Yet each of them are more closely related to giant ground sloths than they are to one another. And what are sloths related to? Well, I can tell you, I might love all of their closest cousins even more than I love sloths. Plus, we get to talk about this. So it's a fantastic day because we're discussing what just might be the most delightful and wonderful clade of extant mammals, the Xenarthra, a group that originated in South America about 60 million years ago and has been filling me with joy ever since. The word Xenarthra means strange or alien joint in reference to the absolutely unique spinal morphology of the group that results in additional rigidity and control over the lower regions of the vertebral column, specifically the sacral and lumbar regions. This spinal articulation is so unusual and so absolutely unique to this group that it is simply called Xenarthri. But Xenarthri is not the only unusual feature of the Xenarthran vertebral column, because they also have an attribute more often seen in dinosaurs, a fusion of many of the bones in the pelvis to the vertebrae of the pelvis, a structure called a synsacrum, which also gives them more spinal rigidity. But that isn't the only way that they're unique. Their limbs are extremely strong with very thick bones for an animal their size and large processes for muscle attachment. They also have unique teeth, and they have only one type of cone cell in their eyes, so they likely only see one color. And this will shock you, but sloths and their relatives have the slowest metabolisms of any eutherian mammals. But what are their closest relatives? Well, their most distant cousins within the Xenarthra are these, the armadillos of the order Cingulata. How wonderful is that? And armadillos, just for the record, include these, which are actually more closely related to some extant armadillos than those armadillos are to the other extant armadillos, even though they weighed more than 2 tons. Not the largest of the Xenarthra, but a dang big armadillo. And I love armadillos. The bigger the better, which isn't to say that the pink fairy armadillo isn't wonderful. I just love armadillos. Cingulata means girdled for reasons that are pretty obvious if you've ever seen an armadillo. They are famously girdled and armored. Today they range in size from the tiny pink fairy armadillo that only weighs about 120 grams or about a quarter pound, about as much as a hamburger patty, to the giant armadillo, which can weigh as much as 54 kilos, which is almost 120 pounds. That's the same as a Great Dane, though they're generally more lab-sized. And I mentioned that there once were truly gigantic armadillos. Not just bigger than most dogs, but bigger than most cars. And if I'd made this video just 12,000 years ago, I would have been talking about them as still being around. But even though they're gone, I still want to talk about them just for a second. I mean, this is probably the closest thing the mammals have ever produced to an ankylosaur, and those are my favorite ornithischian dinosaurs. Armadillos in general are well known for their armor and ability to roll up more or less into a ball. Well, these guys, the Glyptodonts, were extraordinarily well armored, with a solid, ungirdled, shell-like carapace made, like all armadillos, of thick, bony osteoderms. It was ungirdled because Glyptodonts were extra bought into the rigid spine life and had totally fused spines. Their shell was more like that of a turtle in this way than it was like that of most armadillos. Being unable to roll into a ball to protect their undersides, they had osteoderms there as well. So they had an immobile spine, an immobile shell, and an armored belly, all like turtles. But the main reason that I say they were more like ankylosaurs than they were like 5-foot-tall mammal turtles is because many had not only long armored tails, but tails with big clubs at the end, which they used by all appearances primarily to fight with one another, like ankylosaurs. They also had armored heads, as is common in armadillos, but also ankylosaurs. So if a turtle and an ankylosaur had a baby, and that baby was a mammal, this is totally what you'd get. My life is really busy. I'm pretty much working on something all the time. But I still get to enjoy a lot of great content on YouTube, listen to music, and talk to friends and family that are far away because of my Raycon everyday earbuds. I don't go anywhere without them. They're super comfortable, they stay in place when I'm running around, and they sound incredible. Sometimes I completely forget that I even have them on. The active noise cancellation really helps me focus when I'm in loud places, and if I need to stay aware of my surroundings, I can switch to awareness mode with just a tap. The battery life is amazing. Honestly, even though I use them for hours each day, I rarely even have to think about it. I get up to 32 hours with the charging case, which warns me when they're getting low. And even if I forget to plug them in, a quick 10-minute charge gives me 90 minutes of listening time. So I never have to go a day without them. They come in lots of awesome colors. Mine are forest green. So if you're looking for a great pair of earbuds or something thoughtful for Mother's Day, head to buyraycon.com/Clint to get 20% off site-wide. That's buyraycon.com/Clint, or click the link in the description below. Thanks to our friends at Raycon for partnering with us and sponsoring this video. Now let's get back to it. And the glyptodonts appear to have been the largest members of the still extant armadillo family, Clemiphoridae, at least based on the genetic analysis that we've been able to conduct. Because remember, these guys haven't been gone too long. We have their genetic material, which also means that it isn't so far-fetched that we could bring them back one day, which would make me unspeakably happy. I would rather see a glyptodon than a mammoth. Today, the family Clemiphoridae, meaning cloak-wearing, in reference to the cloak-like appearance of their armored carapace, contains roughly 14 species, including the 2 that we discussed earlier. As Xenarthrans, they are unsurprisingly widespread in South America, east of the Andes. But where the herbivorous glyptodonts did make good headway in North America after the 2 continents became connected, the insectivorous or omnivorous extant members of the family just barely touch North America at the southernmost tip of Mexico. If you've seen a wild armadillo north of that point, it was likely one of the 7 or so species in the other extant armadillo family, the family Decipodidae, the hairy-footed armadillos, with all extant species belonging to the genus Dasypus, the long-nosed armadillos, which are, in addition to North America, quite well represented in South America. Which means that you need to know the difference between the 2 families, at least if you're going to be looking for armadillos anywhere south of Mexico. Like many of their cousins, members of the genus Dasypus are primarily insectivorous or omnivorous. They tend to have more bands than their cousins, with 6 to 11 total, though some clemiphorids have many bands as well. No extant dasypodids can roll into a complete ball like some of the clemiphorids can, but again, not all of the clemiphorids can either. And this isn't something that you can see, but members of the genus Dasypus have a unique form of reproduction. Not just unique from their closest relatives, but unique for mammals. They produce 1 zygote, and then it splits into 4 genetically identical embryos, resulting in identical quadruplets every time. Monozygotic polyembryony, which is too rad not to bring up, even if it would be hard to use to distinguish them from their cousins. I really don't know why these are the hairy-footed armadillos, because while some are hairy, I would say as a group, the clemiphorids have hairier undersides and feet. But long-nosed is not bad. Most armadillos have somewhat long noses, but the heads of Dasypus armadillos do tend to be longer and thinner than those of their cousins. So this is probably the best way to distinguish them. Some of you may know a better way, and I will almost certainly do a video covering every armadillo species at some point in the not-so-distant future, so if you know a better way, please let me know. I just love them so much. But right now, I want to talk about a different group of long-nosed, digging sloth relatives. Relatives that are even more closely related to sloths than are the armadillos, but that I might love just as much. So armadillos were in the order Cingulata, the girdled Xenarthrans. And all those that remain are in the order Pilosa, the hairy Xenarthrans. Which I would guess makes sense. Armadillos, even the hairiest armadillos, are the least hairy members of the clade. And the closest relatives of sloths are these, the unspeakably wonderful members of the suborder Vermilingua, the anteaters. Vermilingua means worm tongue, by the way.
Gandalf the Grey is coming.
And other than alligator snapping turtles, I can't think of any group of animals that deserves the name more. I mean, look at that tongue! Though I will acknowledge that there are some other insect-eating animals like aardvarks, numbats, and echidnas that have somewhat similar tongues. Aardvarks, in fact, being members of the Afrotheria, are among the closest relatives of the Xenarthra. However, numbats, being marsupials, are among the least closely related mammals to the true worm tongues. Only echidnas, and other monotremes, are less closely related. And odds are that if you are fairly into animals, you are familiar with the giant anteater. But I will tell you, I was pretty old before I knew where these came from. I think if you would have asked me, I probably would have guessed Africa, like their not-so-distant Afrotherian cousins, the aardvarks. But by now, you probably know enough about Xenarthra to know that Africa is probably not where these are from. There is probably a reason that they have a cousin in the African clade that is filling approximately the same role, because Xenarthra is a South American clade, and that is where the true anteaters are found. Though they have made their way also into southern Mexico, so they do get as far as North America. And I will tell you that for much of my life, the giant anteater was the only anteater I knew about. But it turns out that they are not the only members of their family. There are 3 species. And the family Myrmecophagidae, which literally means anteaters, is not the only family of worm tongues, because there is a second family. So there's the giant anteater in the family Myrmecophagidae, as well as 2 species of arboreal anteaters called tamanduas, which I've adored since I first learned that they existed. Though you would need to watch out how you express your affection for anteaters. They are Xenarthrans, so their arms are abnormally powerful. And those huge claws that they generally use for tearing into insect nests and climbing trees are no joke. They may have no teeth or any ability to bite, but they can mess you up. When a tamandua stands up like this, it isn't just adorable as can be. It's a legitimate threat. Plus, they can release a powerful musk. But it would be very difficult not to want to hug it. I love them. But there is another family with only 1 extant species. The family Cyclopedidae, which is about the most Jim Henson thing we've seen since the Potus. I mean, why is this real? Cyclopedidae means circle feet, apparently because they can nearly fully encircle a branch when climbing. The only extant species, the silky anteater, would probably struggle if the branch is very large, though. It is the smallest of the 4 anteater species. It's the size of a squirrel. Giant anteaters can be over 2 meters long and weigh as much as a giant armadillo, the extant variety. You would never confuse a silky anteater for any of its cousins, but it does look like the baby of a tamandua and a proboscis monkey. These guys have much shorter but proportionally wider heads than their cousins, and even smaller ear pinnae than those of their much larger cousins. But that same tongue, and 2 powerful digging and climbing claws on the front feet, as well as the prehensile tail of its tamandua parent, as old world monkeys don't have prehensile tails. But looking at the way that this animal moves, and those 2-toed feet, it's probably starting to be a bit less shocking that anteaters and sloths might not be that distantly related after all. I have a big and exciting announcement, and I'm going to make that announcement first to our patrons on Patreon. We have a lot of features for our patrons, and one of those is an extra video for our Stinkin' Rad fans every week. So as part of that, this week, I'm going to make a really exciting announcement. If you would like to see those videos or the host of other features that we have for our patrons, or just help support us making content like this, please consider checking it out. Now today, there are 6 species of sloths in 2 families within the suborder of sloths, Folivora, the leaf eaters. But before we get to the extant members of the Folivora, I want to talk for just a moment about giant ground sloths. Because the similarities between the arboreal anteaters and the arboreal sloths are more likely due to convergence than shared ancestry. This is even true if you're just discussing the 2 families of arboreal sloths found today. Because the earliest sloths, from all indications, were not arboreal at all. And while sloths today are found only where you would most expect to find Xenarthrans, in South America and parts of Central America, ancient ground sloths made it far into North America. And giant sloths only went extinct at about the same time as the mammalian ankylosaurs. So there is some room for optimism that we could one day see them again. And if there's one thing that could be as exciting as seeing a glyptodont in the flesh, it might be seeing a megatherium. I mean, some of them were 6 meters long and weighed more than 4 tons. Of course, may not have even been the largest sloth, because other sloths, like Lestodon, were also around that size. You know, the size of an Asian elephant. And here's the thing. The earliest sloths were large and terrestrial. And those two giants were not one another's closest relatives. In fact, Megatherium was more closely related to a 3-toed sloth than it was to Lestodon. And Lestodon was more closely related to a 2-toed sloth than to Megatherium. And 2-toed sloths and 3-toed sloths are both more closely related to a host of giant land sloths than they are to one another. It's just that when all of the land sloth lineages came to an end, the 2 arboreal sloth families were all that remained. And it is remarkable how similarly the 2 lineages turned out. And I'm almost ready to talk about them, but I do have to tell you that we are going to need a video just about ancient sloths, because sloths started down the whale path as well. Yeah, there were marine sloths. And while we're on the subject of false whales, Afrotheria, the closest relatives of Xenarthra, has its own false whales, manatees and dugongs. And while dugongs have 7 neck vertebrae just like all other mammals, manatees are super strange for having only 6. The only other mammals with a number different than 7 are the 2 families of not giraffes, but tree sloths. But the crazy thing, at least if you don't realize that these 2 families are not closely related, is that the numbers, while both different from 7, are different from one another too. 2-toed sloths, called 2-toed sloths because they, like silky anteaters, have only 2 clawed toes on their front legs, have somewhere between 5 and 7. Whereas 3-toed sloths, called 3-toed sloths because they have 3 clawed toes on their front legs, have 8 to 10 neck or cervical vertebrae. There are today 5 species of 3-toed sloths in the family Bradypotidae. The slow-footed sloths, which is a heck of a burn if you think about it. As you would probably expect by now, they are found in South America, but are limited to the more heavily forested regions of northern South America into Central America. In addition to a different number of toes and cervical vertebrae, 3-toed sloths can also be identified by their faces, which are altogether different in shape from their distant 2-toed cousins, and generally sport a dark eye stripe, like that of my favorite snake, the false water cobra, which is found in many of the same places as 3-toed sloths. Additionally, unlike their dual-digited doppelgangers, they have a tail that is long enough to be visible through their fur. And they're smaller than 2-toed sloths, with the largest being only a touch over 6 kilos, less than 14 pounds, and about 80 centimeters long, or about 31 inches. And while these guys aren't inescapably Muppets, I'm pretty sure they get the Jim Henson seal of approval. Of course, that is something that 3-toed sloths have in common with their closest extant but actually rather distant cousins, the 2 species of 2-toed sloths in the family Colopotidae. And I should add that if you're going to call a group of sloths out for being slow-footed, you better have something equally demeaning for the other group of basically equally slow-footed sloths. And good news, Colopotidae means lame-footed. Touché. The range of these lame-footed sloths largely overlaps that of their slow-footed cousins, but does not go quite as far south. So despite being the larger of the 2 micro-tree sloths, they have the smaller range. They are larger by mass though, getting to around 11 kilos or a touch under 24 pounds and nearly 90 centimeters long. Though the largest slow feet are larger than the smallest lame feet. So size is probably not the best way to tell them apart. I would say that the toes and the face are the best indicators. 2-toed sloths lack the eye stripe of their triple-toed pseudo-twins. So if you can see their faces, it really isn't very difficult to tell them apart. And if you think that I'm not going to make a video about every species of sloth in the future, you have another thing coming. And that thing would be a video about every species of sloth. So let me know if you'd like to see that sooner than later. But that concludes our tour of what might be the most wonderful mammalian clade. What group should we cover next? As always, like and subscribe, and we hope to see you real soon. I mean, some of them were 6 meters long and weighed more than tons.
6. That's ginormous.
I think it's 5 tons, but let me... There were marine sloths.
What?
Yeah.
Blue whale sloths?
Big old whale sloths.
Whoa, that's crazy. Clint,
Yo.
you mentioned that the number of toes are their clawed toes.
Mm-hmm.
Do they have more than the 2?
They have more than the 2, but only 2.
Or the
clawed.
3? But they only actually they only have claws on those.
Mm-hmm.
That's some good sloth impersonation.
Been working on it for a long time. I have to slow my metabolism down, lock my spine. Like that's coming down through Alaska and Canada and... Or wait, was it 51st state?
Good.
And down into the United States area, North America.
Past the Gulf of America.
Yep. Then past the Gulf of America, and down into the United States' little brother, South America.
Future United States.
Yeah. Right past our Panama Canal.
Okay.
Which wasn't built yet, but it was going to be huge.
Yeah. Huge. Speaking of extinction, how are sloths not extinct at this point?
Isn't it absurd? Nobody noticed.
Why are they still alive? I mean, they look delicious.
Mm-hmm. Do they?
That's the thing.